The air in the conference room tasted like metal and old coffee recycled through vents that hadn't seen maintenance in a decade. Evangeline Ashford sat with her hands folded in her lap, fingers interlaced so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Across the mahogany table, Garrett Blackwell checked his Rolex, the gold submariner she'd bought him for his 40th birthday with the last of her grandmother's jewelry money, and released a sigh sharp enough to cut glass. 40 floors below, Seattle's streets glistened with rain that hadn't stopped in 3 days. Eva could see her reflection in the polished table surface, a woman wearing a beige cardigan that had seen better days, trousers slightly too loose at the waist. Stress had carved away 10 pounds in the last month alone. She looked like a ghost of someone who used to matter. Garrett's lawyer, Preston Whitmore, slid a document across the table with the practiced ease of a man who'd destroyed lives before breakfast. The folder was thick-bound in navy leather with gold embossing that caught the fluorescent light. "Mrs. Blackwell, let's not make this theatrical." Garrett still hadn't looked at her. His attention remained fixed on his phone thumb, scrolling through something that warranted a smirk. He'd stopped calling her Eva 6 months ago, right around the time the 24-year-old PR consultant started working late nights at his office. "Mr. Whitmore has outlined the terms. It's a clean break. You want out, this is the door." Whitmore offered a smile that never reached his eyes, the kind of expression that cost $800 an hour. "It's quite generous, Mrs. Blackwell, considering the circumstances. You retain the 2018 Honda Civic. You retain your personal effects, clothing, jewelry, items of sentimental value. Mr. Blackwell absorbs all marital debt. In exchange, you waive rights to spousal support and any claim on Blackwell logistics." Marital debt. They'd workshopped that phrase carefully. Garrett had leveraged their lives to the hilt, expanding his shipping empire, taking loans in both their names, mortgaging properties she'd never seen. On paper, they were drowning. Eva knew better. She'd helped him build the shell companies in the Caymans, helped structure the consulting fees to phantom employees, helped bury the profits where the IRS would never find them. She'd been good at it once, before she'd stopped being anything at all. Eva looked at the papers. Her vision swam briefly exhaustion or the heart palpitations that had started 3 months ago. She couldn't tell anymore. "And if I don't sign?" Garrett finally glanced up. His eyes, once the warm blue she'd fallen in love with at a Wharton mixer 12 years ago, had turned flat and cold as January ice. "Then we go to court, Evangeline. I'll bury you in legal fees until you're sleeping in that Honda. I'll drag out proceedings until every friend you have left crosses the street to avoid you. And I'll make certain everyone in this city knows exactly why I'm leaving you." He paused, letting the threat crystallize. "Do you really want me to bring up the incident at the Rainier Club Gala last year?" Eva's chest constricted. The incident was a lie he'd cultivated with surgical precision, a rumor that she was unstable alcoholic prone to outbursts. The truth was simpler and more humiliating. She'd fainted from exhaustion after organizing his charity event single-handedly while battling pneumonia. But Garrett had spun the narrative to their social circle with the same skill he used to spin quarterly earnings. In their world, perception was the only reality that mattered. "No." Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended, barely more than a whisper. "I don't want that." "Then sign. Take the freedom and go. Scarlett is waiting for me downstairs." Scarlett. The 24-year-old with the expensive highlights and the laugh that carried across restaurants. The one who looked at Garrett like he'd hung the moon, not knowing he was a black hole that devoured everything in his orbit. Eva picked up the pen. It was heavy Mont Blanc, another gift she'd given him from money she no longer had. Her hand trembled once before she forced it steady. She thought about the 12 years, the night she'd stayed up rewriting his business proposals because dyslexia made the words dance on the page and his pride wouldn't let him admit it. The way she'd used her inheritance from her grandmother to bail out his first failing venture, watching her safety net dissolve into his ambition. She looked at him one final time, really looked, searching for any remnant of the man who'd promised her the world on a rooftop in Philadelphia. "0. She said it so softly that Whitmore leaned forward. "I'm sorry. I leave with 0. That's what you want to hear, isn't it? That I'm walking away with nothing." Eva lowered the pen to paper. Her signature flowed in rapid, sharp strokes, muscle memory from 1,000 documents she'd signed on his behalf over the years. Evangeline Hale. She dropped the Blackwell immediately, reclaiming the name from her mother's second marriage, the only family she had left. Garrett snatched the papers before the ink dried, actually laughed, a bark of pure triumph that echoed off the glass walls. Smart girl, finally. He stood buttoning his suit jacket with the air of a man who'd just closed the deal of the century. You have until Friday to vacate the Medina estate. I'll have security check your bags to ensure you're not taking any of my silverware. Eva rose slowly. The room tilted slightly and she gripped the chair back, willing the lightheadedness to pass. She couldn't faint. Not here, not now, not in front of him. You don't have to worry, Garrett. I don't want anything that you've touched. She walked out of the conference room, past the glass walls where junior associates pretended not to stare past the secretaries who'd stopped meeting her eyes 3 months ago when the whispers started. The elevator descent felt like falling through 40 floors of her own failure. When the doors opened onto the lobby, rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows with renewed violence, as if the sky itself was furious on her behalf. The Honda was parked 2 blocks away, racking up fees she couldn't afford. Eva sat in the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, staring at the Seattle skyline through rain-streaked glass. She had exactly $417 in her checking account. No job. A 10-year gap on her resume that screamed unemployable. She was 34 years old and starting over with less than nothing, starting over in a hole so deep she couldn't see daylight. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry over him. Not anymore. Not after the first affair or the second or the night she'd found texts that made her realize she'd stopped being a wife and become an unpaid employee in his life. Eva pulled out her phone, an old model 3 generations behind Garrett's latest iPhone. Her hands moved on autopilot, dialing a number she hadn't called in years. Fletcher. The voice was sharp, professional, a man who valued time more than pleasantries. Dean, it's Evangeline Hale. The pause stretched long enough that she wondered if he'd hung up. Evangeline, my God, I haven't heard from you since the wedding. He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what he'd almost said, since you threw your life away. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm calling because I need a favor. I need work. Anything. I'll file papers, fetch coffee, I just need. Evangeline, you were top of your class. But the market is brutal right now, especially with a gap like yours. She could hear him thinking, weighing options, calculating whether helping her was worth the political capital. Please, Dean. I have a contact. It's not glamorous, high-risk portfolio management firm. They chew people up and spit them out like sunflower seeds. The boss is difficult. Nobody lasts more than 3 months as his personal analyst. Eva watched rain stream down the windshield, distorting the city into abstract shapes. I survived Garrett Blackwell for 12 years. I can handle difficult. The guy's name is Damian Holloway. I'll text you his office address. Don't be late, Evangeline. And good luck. You're going to need it. The line went dead. Eva stared at her phone as the address appeared: Holloway Ventures, Columbia Center, Suite 7600. The tallest building in Seattle, the kind of address that spoke of serious money and even more serious power. Damian Holloway. The name sent electricity down her spine, recognition mixed with something darker. The phantom of Silicon Valley, the man who bought failing companies, stripped them for parts and rebuilt them into empires. Known to be a recluse, a genius, and utterly ruthless. The business journals called him the Dark Prince of venture capital. A man who treated billion-dollar deals like chess problems and people like pawns. Eva started the engine. It sputtered, coughed, caught. She sat there for a moment, listening to the rain hammer the roof. Damian Holloway. She said it aloud to the empty car, tasting the syllables. Let's see what you've got. She didn't know it yet, but she wasn't driving toward a job. She was driving toward the weapon she'd used to kill her past. 2 weeks bled into the calendar like ink spreading through water. Eva moved into a studio apartment in Rainier Valley, a neighborhood where police sirens provided the nightly soundtrack. The mattress sat directly on the floor. Her dining table was a stack of moving boxes she'd salvaged from behind a grocery store. She'd spent every conscious hour studying Damien Holloway with the obsessive focus of a hunter learning her prey's patterns. She consumed every article, every market analysis, every obscure podcast interview he'd given in the last 5 years. She knew his investment patterns better than she knew her own heartbeat, the way he favored disruption plays in legacy industries, how he always took controlling interest, never settling for advisory positions. She knew he'd started with nothing, built his first million by 25 through cryptocurrency arbitrage, before most people understood what blockchain meant, and never looked back. When she arrived at Columbia Center for the interview, she looked different. She'd cut her hair into a severe bob at a discount salon, no money for the stylist who used to charge $300. But the severity suited her, sharpened her features into something almost dangerous. She wore a black suit from a consignment store tailored by her own hand in the apartment at 2 in the morning because sleep had become optional. The seams were invisible, the fit perfect. The receptionist, a woman whose manicure probably cost more than Eva's entire outfit, looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "Mr. Holloway is in a meeting. He usually cancels interviews, so don't get comfortable." "I'll wait." Eva sat in the reception area for 4 hours. Most candidates would have left. She sat perfectly still, reading financial reports on her cracked phone screen, watching employees scurry past with the wide-eyed look of prey animals. The atmosphere wasn't just high pressure, it was predatory, charged with the kind of fear that came from working for someone who saw incompetence as a personal insult. At 2:47 p.m., the double doors at the corridor's end exploded open. A man in a Brooks Brothers suit practically ran out clutching a box of personal belongings, his face the color of curdled milk. He looked like he might vomit in the potted ficus. The receptionist didn't even glance up. "You're next. Try not to cry in front of him. He hates that." Eva walked into the office. It was massive, entirely glass and steel, overlooking Elliott Bay and the mountains beyond. But the blinds were drawn, casting the space in shadow. At the far end, behind a desk that looked carved from a single piece of obsidian, sat Damien Holloway. He didn't look up. 3 monitors surrounded him, fingers flying across keyboards in a rhythm that suggested he was conducting multiple conversations simultaneously. The blue light from the screens cast harsh shadows across his face. "You're the referral from Fletcher." His voice was deep, gravel rough, completely devoid of warmth. It wasn't a question. "Resume." Eva placed it on the desk. He glanced at it for exactly 2 seconds. "Wharton Honors." Then nothing. Damien finally looked at her. The impact was physical. He was striking in a way that had nothing to do with conventional attractiveness. A scar bisected his left eyebrow. His eyes were dark and analytical, examining her like she was code that might contain a critical bug. He hadn't shaved in days. He looked exhausted and dangerous in equal measure. 10 years. You were a housewife. What makes you think you can handle my accounts? I deal with billions, Mrs. Hale, not grocery budgets." "Ms. Hale." Eva's voice came out steady, stronger than she felt. "And I didn't just manage a household. I managed Garrett Blackwell." Damien stopped typing. His eyes narrowed. "Blackwell Logistics. That house of cards. That house of cards posted a 40% profit increase last quarter because I restructured his debt consolidation strategy in 2018. I routed his logistics through shell corporations in Panama to avoid tariffs, legal, barely but effective. I found loopholes in maritime shipping laws that saved him $3 million annually." Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. "You did that?" He took the credit. I did the math. Eva took a step forward, closing the distance between supplicant and equal. "I know you're looking at acquiring Kincaid Tech. I know you're hesitant because their Q3 numbers look inflated." Damien raised one scarred eyebrow. "Go on." "They are inflated. They're capitalizing their R&D costs to boost current earnings. Classic Enron-light accounting. If you buy them at asking price, you're buying a bomb. But..." She paused, letting the word hang. "If you wait 2 weeks, their audit drops. The stock will crater. You can pick them up for pennies on the dollar and strip the patent portfolio, which is the only asset with real value." Damien leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. He stared at her with an intensity that felt like being dissected. "Fletcher said you were sharp. He didn't say you were ruthless." "I have nothing left to lose, Mr. Holloway. That makes me very dangerous and very useful." Damien picked up a file from his desk and tossed it across the polished surface. It slid to a stop at the edge, perfectly positioned for her to catch. "Forensic audit of a subsidiary in Hong Kong. It's a mess. My current team says it's clean. I think they're lying or incompetent. You have until tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. to find the leak." He returned his attention to the monitors, dismissing her. "And if I find it, then you have a job. Trial period. Minimum wage for the first month." It was an insult, a billionaire paying minimum wage to a Wharton graduate. Eva didn't flinch. "I'll have it on your desk by 6. She grabbed the file and turned to leave. His voice stopped her at the door. "One more thing, Ms. Hale." She looked back. "Why are you here? A woman with your talent could go to a nice, safe bank. Why walk into the wolf's den?" Eva tightened her grip on the file, feeling the edges bite into her palm. "Because I need to learn how to hunt." Damien's lips quirked in the faintest ghost of a smile. "Get out of my office." Eva worked through the night in her apartment, the file spread across the moving boxes, her laptop balanced on her knees. She didn't sleep, didn't eat. The numbers swam across the screen in patterns that would have looked like chaos to anyone else, but to her, they were a language, a story being told in debits and credits. By 4 a.m., she found it a discrepancy of $50,000 buried in shipping manifests repeated thousands of times across 18 months. It was a skimming operation, elegant in its simplicity, devastating in its scope. Someone in Hong Kong had been bleeding Holloway Ventures for millions, and they'd hidden it in plain sight by keeping each individual theft below the threshold that would trigger automated flags. Eva documented everything, the pattern, the responsible parties, the estimated total loss. She built the case methodically, the way she'd once built cases for Garrett before realizing he'd never give her credit. This time, there was no one to steal her work. She placed the report on Damien's desk at 5:54 a.m. The security guard had looked at her like she was insane, but her temporary access badge worked. The office was dark, silent, except for the hum of servers in a closet somewhere. When Damien arrived at 8, she was back in reception, nursing terrible coffee and watching the sun burn through the marine layer over Puget Sound. She heard him before she saw him, rapid footsteps, the kind of urgency that meant something had happened. He appeared in the doorway holding her report. "Security, my office, now." Damien disappeared back down the corridor. Eva followed, heart hammering against her ribs. Inside, he had the report open on all 3 monitors, color-coded spreadsheets showing the money trail she'd uncovered. "I need to make a call." He picked up his phone, pressed a single button. "Michael, it's Holloway. Fire the entire Hong Kong accounting team. Yes, all of them. I'm sending you a report that explains why. And Michael, get Evangeline Hale an office. The one next to mine." He hung up, turned to face her. "You just saved me $8 million. Minimum wage is bullshit. You start at 150 base plus performance bonuses. You report directly to me. Your job is to find problems before they metastasize into catastrophes." Eva felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, something that might have been hope if she'd still believed in that kind of thing. "When do I start?" "You already have." 3 months dissolved into a blur of 70-hour weeks and deals that moved at the speed of thought. Eva stopped being the woman who drove a Honda and apologized for existing. Under Damien's brutal tutelage, and it was brutal, he expected perfection, and punished mediocrity with cutting silence, she was being forged into something harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. She wasn't just an analyst anymore. She was Damien's shadow, present in board meetings where her silence carried more weight than the shouting directors. She anticipated his needs before he vocalized them, the espresso at 2 p.m. precisely when his focus started to drift. The dossier on a rival CEO prepared before he'd asked for it. They'd developed a rhythm that wasn't friendship. Damien didn't do friends, but it was seamless, a high-velocity partnership built on mutual respect and the understanding that competence was the only currency that mattered. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Eva was deep in the archives of Holloway Ventures, analyzing a potential merger with a shipping conglomerate called Trident Maritime. Damien wanted to acquire Trident to handle hardware distribution for his tech portfolio. It was massive, nearly $2 billion, the kind of deal that could reshape supply chains across the Pacific Northwest. She was cross-referencing Trident's vendor list when the name appeared on her screen, Nexus Logistics. Recurring payments, $200,000 monthly for consulting services. The address was a P.O. box in Nevada. Eva's blood turned to ice water. She knew that P.O. box. She'd paid the rental fee 3 years ago when Garrett said he needed a private mailing address for surprise gifts. The gifts never materialized, but the box remained on their credit card statement, a line item she'd stopped questioning. Her hands moved faster, pulling the thread. Nexus Logistics wasn't a logistics company. It was a shell, and it was billing Trident Maritime for services that didn't exist. The invoices were authorized by Trident's COO, a man named Dylan Kane. Eva typed the name into the database, felt her stomach drop. Dylan Kane, Garrett's fraternity brother, the one who'd been best man at their wedding. The picture assembled itself in her mind with horrible clarity. Garrett and Dylan were siphoning money out of Trident before the sale to Damien. They were inflating operating costs, pocketing the cash through the Nexus shell, setting up a golden parachute funded by Holloway's acquisition price. If Damien bought Trident, he'd be buying a company bleeding millions, and Garrett would walk away rich on money that should have stayed in shareholder value. "You son of a bitch," Eva whispered it to the empty archive room. Then she grabbed her laptop and walked straight to Damien's office, bypassing his assistant with a look that communicated this couldn't wait. Damien was on a call with Tokyo, something about semiconductor tariffs. He saw her face pale, determined, furious, and hung up without explanation. "What is it?" Eva slammed the laptop onto his desk, angling the screen so he could see. "Don't buy Trident. The deal closes in 3 days, Hale. We're in final stages. It's a trap. Garrett Blackwell is skimming off the top. He's in bed with Trident's COO, inflating the valuation. If you buy it, you're handing my ex-husband a $10 million payday, and you'll own a company with a hole in its balance sheet the size of the Olympic Peninsula." Damien read the screen in silence. His expression turned to stone, the temperature in the room dropping 10 degrees. "He's stealing from me." It wasn't a question. Indirectly, but yes. Damien looked at her, something dangerous flickering behind his eyes. "You just saved me $2 billion. I just stopped Garrett from winning. That's all I care about." Damien hit the intercom. "Cancel the Trident deal. Draft a press release citing financial irregularities discovered during due diligence, and leak it to the Wall Street Journal. I want everyone to know why we walked away." The news hit the market the next morning. Trident's stock plummeted 30%. The deal collapsed. Garrett's golden parachute evaporated. But Eva had miscalculated one critical factor. She'd underestimated what a desperate man would do when backed into a corner. 4 days later, she was packing for a business trip. Damien needed her in Chicago to close a clean energy deal. Meridian Energy, a week-long negotiation that would position Holloway Ventures as the dominant player in Midwest solar infrastructure. It was the kind of opportunity that could cement her reputation, prove she'd rebuilt herself into something formidable. The knock came at 6:30 p.m. Eva was in her apartment, the one she'd upgraded to after 3 months of Damien's paycheck, still modest, but it had a bedroom and windows that didn't face a brick wall. She'd thought it was the food delivery she'd ordered. It wasn't. The process server was polite, efficient, and utterly indifferent to the way Eva's face drained of color as he handed her the envelope. "Evangeline Hale." "Yes." "You've been served." Eva tore the envelope open with shaking hands. The letterhead swam into focus. Superior Court of Washington, King County. Plaintiff Blackwell Logistics and Garrett Blackwell. Defendant Evangeline Hale. Charges breach of non-disclosure agreement, theft of trade secrets, corporate espionage. She read frantically the legalese, a blur of accusations. Garrett claimed she'd stolen proprietary client lists when she left the marriage and used them to secure employment at Holloway Ventures. He claimed her insights into Trident were based on stolen confidential marital conversations. It was a fabrication, every word of it. But that wasn't the worst part. The emergency injunction request made her knees buckle. She sank onto the couch, the papers trembling in her hands. The plaintiff requests an immediate restraining order preventing the defendant from engaging in any financial consulting activities pending the outcome of this trial. The plaintiff further requests the seizure of all electronic devices and travel documents to prevent flight risk. The hearing was Friday at 9 a.m. Today was Wednesday. Her flight to Chicago with Damien was Thursday morning. The math was simple and devastating. If she went to Chicago, she'd miss the hearing. A default judgment would be entered against her. She'd be branded a thief and a spy. Her career would detonate before it had fully rebuilt. Damien would have to fire her to protect his company's reputation, no way around it. The liability would be too great. But if she stayed for the hearing, she missed Chicago. She missed the deal. She missed the biggest opportunity of her life. Her phone rang. Garrett's name lit up the screen. Eva answered, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. "Do you like the reading material?" His voice was slurred liquid courage from expensive scotch. "It's all lies, Garrett. Perjury. It's leverage, Evangeline. I know about Chicago. I know you're the golden girl over at Holloway now, making 6 figures flying first class to business meetings. But you can't go to Chicago if your passport is flagged by a court order. Can you?" Eva closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. "What do you want?" "I want you to quit. Publicly. Resign from Holloway Ventures, admit you're incompetent, that you got the job through deception. Then I'll drop the lawsuit. And if I don't, then I drag this out for years. I ruin your name. You'll never work in this town again. Hell, you'll never work anywhere. I'll make sure of it." Eva hung up. She sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, the lights of Seattle spreading out below like a constellation of other people's lives, other people's happiness. She had to tell Damien. An hour later, she stood in his office. The sun was setting over the Olympics, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple. She held the summons in her hand like it might detonate. She explained everything. The lies, the trap, the impossible choice between Chicago and the hearing. Damien listened, leaning back in his chair, his face unreadable. When she finished, he stared out at the darkening skyline. "So if you go to Chicago, you lose the lawsuit and your reputation. If you stay, you miss the deal." "I have to stay, Damien. I have to fight this. But I can't be your associate director if I'm tied up in court for months. You need someone in Chicago who can close this." Eva took a breath, feeling the words cut her throat on the way out. "I'm resigning. It's the only way to keep the company clean." Damien spun his chair around. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was something deeper, more dangerous. "You think I care about a nuisance lawsuit from a bankrupt shipping executive?" "He has connections, Damien. He moved the hearing up. He's trying to ground me." Damien stood. He walked around the desk, closing the distance between them until he was close enough that she could smell his cologne sandalwood and rain expensive and subtle. He'd never been this close before. "Pack your bags, Evangeline." "What? I can't. The hearing. You are going to Chicago. You're going to close that deal. You're going to make me $100 million. But the court date is Friday. If I'm not there..." Damien checked his watch, the gesture precise and final. "The hearing is Friday at 9 a.m. in Seattle. The signing in Chicago is Thursday at 4 p.m. Central Time. That's impossible, Damien. Even if we sign at 4 with the time difference, there's no way. Commercial flights don't work that way." Damien smiled. It was a terrifying expression, all teeth and dark promise. "Who said anything about commercial?" He picked up his phone, dialed a number from memory. "Prepare the G650. File a flight plan for Chicago, then immediate return to Seattle. I don't care about FAA overtime fees. We have a court date to crash." He looked at Eva, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something that might have been genuine emotion beneath the armor. "Garrett wants a war fine, but he brought a knife. I'm bringing a nuclear option. And Evangeline, There's something you need to know before we get on that plane. Something about your family. Something about me." Eva felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What are you talking about?" Damien's expression was unreadable, somewhere between regret and determination. "Your real last name, the one from your father. It's not Hale. It's Ashford. And so is mine." The words hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. "We need to talk about your father, about Jonathan Ashford, about the $2.3 billion you're going to inherit in exactly 9 months, and about why Garrett Blackwell is really suing you." The revelation hung between them like smoke after a gunshot. Eva's mind spun through the implications, trying to find purchase on something that made sense. Damien Holloway was her half-brother. Jonathan Ashford, a name she barely remembered, a father who died in a plane crash when she was 8, had left her billions, and somehow Garrett knew. "You're lying." The words came out automatically, a reflex against information too large to process. "I wish I were." Damien moved to the wall of windows, hands in his pockets, silhouette dark against the city lights bleeding through the twilight. "Your father had an affair with my mother before he married yours. I was born 6 months before Jonathan met your mother at a Stanford alumni mixer. He never acknowledged me publicly, couldn't risk the scandal. But he put me through school, set up a trust, gave me seed capital for my first fund. Then he died, and I spent 20 years building an empire to prove I didn't need his name." Eva felt her legs weaken. She sat down hard in the chair across from his desk. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Garrett hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago, the same day Trident deal collapsed. He knows about the Ashford Trust. He knows it activates on your 35th birthday, which is in 9 months. And he knows that trust is worth $2.3 billion. The number was so absurd, Eva almost laughed. She'd been living on ramen and canned soup 6 months ago. She'd considered $400 a fortune. "That's impossible. My mother never said—" "Your mother was protecting you. Jonathan's will had a clause the heir had to survive to 35 to receive the inheritance. Before that, it's locked in managed funds. Your mother didn't want you to become dependent, to wait for a payday instead of building a life. She wanted you to be strong enough to handle it when the time came." Damien turned back to face her, and the resemblance was suddenly obvious. The same sharp cheekbones, the same intensity in the eyes, the same way they both attacked problems like equations to be solved. "I've been watching you for years, Eva, making sure you were safe. When Fletcher called asking for a favor, I knew it was time. You needed to be somewhere I could protect you until the inheritance activates. Because if you die before 35, the money reverts to charity. And if you're declared mentally incompetent, which is exactly what Garrett is trying to do with this lawsuit, then whoever has guardianship controls the trust." The pieces locked into place with sickening clarity. The emergency psychiatric evaluation request buried in the legal filing. The emphasis on her suicide attempt from 2 years ago. The claims of instability and poor judgment. "He's not trying to destroy me. He's trying to own me." For 9 months. Then he'd have access to $2 billion. Enough to disappear every debt he has, build the empire he always wanted, and never think about you again except as the golden goose he almost let slip away. Eva stood pacing to the window. Below, Seattle teemed with traffic people heading home to families and lives that made sense. Her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. "Why didn't you tell me when I started working here? Would you have believed me? You were barely holding together. I needed you to rebuild yourself first, to remember who you were before Garrett dismantled you piece by piece. And—" Damien hesitated, the first time she'd ever seen him uncertain. "I needed to make sure you were worth protecting, that you weren't just another spoiled trust fund heir waiting to cash out. And your verdict: you're the best analyst I've ever worked with. You're ruthless when you need to be and principled when it costs you. You're my sister, and I'll be damned if I let Garrett Blackwell steal what our father wanted you to have." Eva turned away from the window, meeting his eyes. "What's in this for you? Jonathan's will must have terms for you too." Damien's jaw tightened. "Smart. Yes. I receive $500 million from a separate trust, but only if you successfully inherit yours. If you die or lose competency, I get nothing. Jonathan's way of ensuring I'd protect you. Clever bastard even from beyond the grave. So you need me alive and sane. I need my sister to get what she deserves. The money is secondary. Eva wanted to believe him. Part of her did the part that recognized the same loneliness in him that had lived inside her for years, the isolation that came from being underestimated and fighting twice as hard to prove your worth. Chicago. If we close the Meridian deal, it proves I'm competent, that I'm not some fragile housewife having a breakdown. Exactly. And when we get back for the hearing, we'll have documentation showing you just negotiated $1.8 billion in solar infrastructure while Garrett was busy filing frivolous lawsuits. No judge will grant him guardianship after that. Eva pulled out her phone, checking the time. Wednesday, 8:47 p.m. The flight to Chicago left at 6 a.m. tomorrow. What do I need to know about Frederick Brennan? Damien smiled, and it transformed his face from intimidating to almost conspiratorial. He's 62, old-school energy magnate who thinks women belong in PR departments. He's selling Meridian's solar division because he doesn't believe renewable energy has a future, thinks it's Silicon Valley fantasy. We're buying it because his grid integration in the Midwest is the missing piece we need to dominate the market. Weaknesses. Pride. He'd rather walk away from the table than admit a woman understands his business better than he does. Use it. Eva grabbed her bag from where she'd dropped it by the door. I'll be ready at 5:30. Eva. She stopped. Thank you for trusting me with this. I know it's a lot. I don't trust you yet, Damien, but I trust that we both want Garrett to lose. That's enough for now. She left before he could respond, taking the elevator down to street level, where the night air hit her face like cold water. Eva walked the 12 blocks to her apartment, needing the movement to process everything that had just detonated in her carefully reconstructed life. A half-brother, a dead father who'd left her billions, a conspiracy that made Garrett's cruelty suddenly make terrible sense. She'd thought he'd just been a narcissist who'd grown bored with his wife. The truth was so much worse. He'd been a predator who'd identified prey worth $2 billion and married it. Eva's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hello. Evangeline, it's Scarlett. The voice was young, uncertain, nothing like the confident woman who'd laughed at Garrett's side at charity events. Eva stopped walking, every muscle tensing. How did you get this number? I took it from Garrett's phone. Please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. It's about the baby. Eva's heart stuttered. What baby? I'm pregnant. 12 weeks. It's Garrett's. The street tilted. Eva leaned against a storefront, the neon from a faux restaurant washing everything in red and blue. Why are you telling me this? Because he wants me to get rid of it. Says a baby would complicate things, whatever the hell that means. But I looked into his financials. I'm not stupid. I work in corporate communications. I found court documents. He's suing you. And I found transfers to an offshore account in the Caymans, payments from something called Nexus Logistics. Scarlett's voice cracked. I think he's been using me. And now I have his child and I don't know what to do. I thought I know you hate me. I would hate me too. But you're the only person who understands what he's capable of. Eva closed her eyes, fighting through the surge of emotions, betrayal, vindication, unexpected sympathy for this girl who'd helped destroy her marriage, and was now learning the same lesson Eva had. Garrett Blackwell used people until they stopped being useful, then discarded them without conscience. What do you want from me? I don't know. Advice. Proof that I'm not crazy for being scared. You're not crazy, you're in danger. Garrett doesn't do complications, he eliminates them. If you want to keep that baby, you need to disappear. Do you have family somewhere he can't find you? My sister's in Portland, but Evangeline, don't call me again. I can't help you. I can barely help myself. But if you're smart, you'll leave before he decides the problem isn't the pregnancy, it's you. Eva hung up, blocking the number immediately. She stood there in the neon glow, processing this new variable. Scarlett pregnant. Garrett pressuring her to terminate. The cruelty was breathtaking even by his standards. For a moment, Eva considered calling Child Protective Services, planting a flag for when the baby was born. Then she remembered she had her own war to fight. Scarlett had made her choices. Eva couldn't save everyone, especially not the woman who'd helped dismantle her life. She walked the remaining blocks home, packed a carry-on with ruthless efficiency, and spent 3 hours researching Frederick Brennan until the words blurred. At 3 a.m., she finally let herself sleep, though her dreams were filled with plane crashes and courtrooms and a father she couldn't quite remember telling her she was going to be okay. The G650 sliced through pre-dawn darkness, climbing to cruising altitude over the Cascades. Eva sat across from Damien in the cabin that smelled of leather and money, both of them surrounded by tablets and documents. The jet was absurdly luxurious full-galley bedroom in the back seats that converted to beds. This was how billionaires traveled, insulated from every inconvenience that plagued normal humans. Frederick Brennan made his fortune in coal. Damien was briefing her as Chicago approached, reviewing tactics like generals before battle. Meridian Energy was his father's company, inherited 30 years ago. He's held on to the coal assets while grudgingly investing in solar because the board forced his hand. Now he's selling off the renewables division because he genuinely believes it's worthless. Doesn't understand that the technology has matured past the point where his skepticism matters. How entrenched is the misogyny? He walked out of a meeting last year because the opposing counsel was a woman, refused to negotiate until they sent a man. Eva absorbed this calculating angles. Then we use it. Let him underestimate me. Give him rope. He'll be condescending, dismissive. It'll be ugly. I've survived worse than a dinosaur's fragile ego. The flight was 4 hours. They landed at Chicago Midway at 10:43 a.m. local time, a convoy of black SUVs waiting on the tarmac. The November wind off Lake Michigan cut through Eva's coat as they crossed to the vehicles, sharp enough to take her breath. The city sprawled around them, steel and glass towers, the architectural canyon of the Loop, everything harder-edged than Seattle's softer Pacific Northwest aesthetic. They drove to the Union League Club, a building that screamed old money and older values, the kind of place where women had only been allowed membership for 30 years and still weren't entirely welcome. Frederick Brennan was waiting in a private dining room, oak-paneled and suffocating with tradition. He was 62, with the red face of a man who enjoyed steaks and bourbon in quantities his doctor disapproved of. 3 lawyers flanked him, all men in their 50s, wearing expressions of practiced boredom. "Mr. Holloway." Brennan's handshake was aggressive, a dominance play. He didn't acknowledge Eva's presence. "You've traveled a long way for a portfolio of solar panels that haven't turned a profit in 5 years. I like undervalued assets. They have a way of surprising people." Damien gestured to Eva, his tone deliberately casual. "My associate director, Ms. Hale, will lead the valuation discussion." Brennan's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. "A woman for a negotiation of this magnitude, Mr. Holloway, surely we can speak man to man about the real numbers." Eva didn't wait for Damien to defend her. She opened her leather portfolio, extracting a single sheet of paper and sliding it across the mahogany table. "Mr. Brennan, your solar division Meridian Helios has been hemorrhaging capital for 5 consecutive years. Not because the technology is flawed, but because your grid integration across the Midwest is fundamentally broken. You're losing 15% of generated power in transmission alone." Brennan scoffed, the sound like a bulldog's bark. "Technical hiccups. Growing pains. Every new system has them." "Structural failure." Eva's voice cut across his dismissal, sharp and precise. "I've analyzed your maintenance logs from the last 3 years. You have transformers operating at 83% efficiency when industry standard is 97. Your storage batteries are outdated lithium polymer when everyone else has moved to solid state. And most critically, you have an Environmental Protection Agency inquiry pending." The color drained from Brennan's face. "How the hell do you know about the EPA?" I read, "Federal databases are public record if you know where to look. The inquiry concerns improper disposal of degraded solar panels containing cadmium telluride. The fine, when it comes, and it will come next month when their investigation concludes, will be approximately $60 million. Eva leaned forward. "You have 2 choices, Mr. Brennan. Sell to us at the valuation I've prepared, which includes a premium that covers your existing debt and gives you a clean exit. Or keep the asset, pay the EPA fine. Watch your stock crater and explain to your board why you chose pride over prudence. This offer expires when I walk out that door." Silence crashed through the room like a physical force. Brennan's lawyers exchanged glances, one of them pulling out a phone to presumably verify the EPA claim. Damien sat back, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. "You can't just threaten me with regulatory action and expect—" "I'm not threatening you. I'm presenting facts. What you do with those facts is entirely your decision." Brennan's jaw worked, fury and calculation warring across his features. He looked at his lead counsel, who gave the smallest shake of his head a warning not to escalate. "Let's take a break. 15 minutes. The lawyers filed out. Brennan followed, moving like a man who'd just had the ground drop from beneath him. Damien and Eva remained seated. "That was reckless. You backed him into a corner." Damien's tone was approving despite the words. "He's a bully. Bullies fold when you call their bluff. Unless they don't. If he walks, we lose months of groundwork. He won't walk. His board will crucify him if that EPA fine hits and he's still holding the asset. He's going to try to save face by grinding us on terms, but he'll sell." The negotiation that followed was exactly as Eva predicted. Brennan fought for every clause, every warranty, every indemnification. Hours bled away in arguments over intellectual property rights and liability caps. The sun tracked across the Chicago skyline, shadows lengthening through the tall windows. By 9 p.m. they'd covered everything except the battery technology patents. Brennan had drawn a line. The next-generation lithium-sulfur batteries stay with Meridian. They're our crown jewel for future R&D. Eva had prepared for this. She pulled up a schematic on her tablet. "These batteries—" She showed him the design, watched his eyes widen slightly. "They're useless without the grid infrastructure we're buying. Without our network, they're just expensive paperweights. You'll spend 5 years and $50 million building a distribution system to utilize them, money your board won't approve after they see this quarter's losses." Brennan slammed his hand on the table. "I won't be lectured by a—" He caught himself, but the unspoken word hung in the air like poison. Eva felt Damien tense beside her, but kept her expression neutral. "By someone who's done the math. That's the difference between us, Mr. Brennan. I deal in facts. You deal in ego, and ego doesn't pay the bills." She stood gathering her documents with deliberate calm. "The battery patents are non-negotiable. Include them or the deal is off." "Where are you going?" "To the airport. I have a court date in Seattle tomorrow morning. I don't have time for posturing." Eva walked toward the door, each step measured, fighting every instinct that screamed to stay and salvage the deal. This was the gamble, the moment where everything either collapsed or crystallized. Her hand touched the brass handle. "Wait!" Brennan's voice was rough, defeated. "Fine. Take the damn batteries. Give me the pen." Eva turned slowly, maintaining the mask of indifference even as relief flooded through her. She returned to the table, slid the contract across. Brennan signed with angry, jagged strokes. "Pleasure doing business." Her tone was professional, devoid of triumph. They shook hands, his grip trying to crush hers, her grip steady and unyielding. Outside, the November night had turned bitter. Eva and Damien practically ran to the waiting SUV, the driver already pulling away from the curb as they dove into the back seat. "That was the most terrifying thing I've ever watched." Damien's voice carried genuine awe. "You were going to walk away from $1.8 billion. Had to. He needed to believe I valued my dignity more than his money. Men like Brennan only respect people who won't bow." Eva checked her phone. 10:47 p.m. Thursday, Chicago time. The hearing was 8:30 a.m. Friday, Seattle time. Accounting for the 2-hour time difference, she had less than 12 hours. "Can we make it?" "Physics says maybe. I say we're going to damn well try." The SUV screamed through Chicago's streets, running lights that the CPD motorcycle escorts had cleared. At Midway, the G650 waited with engines already spooling, pilots having filed the flight plan the moment the contract was signed. They were airborne by 11:15 p.m. Eva collapsed into the leather seat, adrenaline finally draining. Damien poured 2 glasses of scotch from the Jet's bar, handed her one. 2 impossible timelines and reckless gambits. They touched glasses. The scotch burned perfectly. "There's something you should know." Eva set down her glass. "Scarlett called me yesterday. She's pregnant. With Garrett's baby." Damien's expression darkened. "Does he know?" "Yes. He's pressuring her to terminate. She's scared. I told her to run." "Will she?" "I don't know. I can't save everyone, Damien. I can barely save myself." "You're doing better than you think." The flight attendant brought food, actual plated meals, not airline trays. Eva realized she hadn't eaten since the airport muffin at 5 a.m. She forced herself to eat mechanically fuel for the battle ahead. Halfway across Montana, Damien's phone buzzed. He read the message face going carefully blank. "What? Email from my security team. They've been monitoring Garrett's communications. He just sent a message to his lawyer. Make sure Ashford knows what she's walking into. I want her to panic." Eva's stomach clenched. "What does that mean?" "He's planning something for tomorrow, some kind of ambush at the hearing." "Let him. We have the Chicago deal. We have documentation. What can he possibly—" Her own phone lit up. Email from an unknown sender, no subject line. Eva opened it against her better judgment. A video file. She pressed play. The footage was security camera quality, black and white timestamp from 2 days ago. It showed Scarlett entering a building Eva didn't recognize, meeting a man in a conference room. The man slid an envelope across the table. Scarlett took it, counted what looked like cash, nodded. The video cut to a different angle. Scarlett shaking hands with the man, who turned toward the camera just long enough for Eva to identify him. Preston Whitmore, Garrett's lawyer. "No," Eva's voice was barely a whisper. "She's going to testify against you." Damien had leaned over to watch. His jaw tightened. "Garrett paid her to flip. She'll claim you threatened her, probably say you tried to coerce her into terminating the pregnancy or leaving Garrett. Character assassination to support the incompetency claim." Eva felt sick. She'd pitied Scarlett, had actually considered helping her. The whole phone call had been theater, setting Eva up to look callous and cruel when Scarlett took the stand. "He's been planning this for weeks. The lawsuit, the timing, using Scarlett as a weapon, it's all coordinated. Then we coordinate better." Damien pulled out his own phone, typing rapidly. "I'm sending this video to Victor Thorne. He's the best trial attorney in Seattle, specializes in corporate espionage cases. I've had him on retainer since you started working for me, just in case. He'll be at the courthouse tomorrow with counter-evidence." "What kind of counter-evidence?" "The kind that shows Scarlett accepted $100,000 to commit perjury. The kind that proves Garrett is orchestrating a conspiracy to defraud you of an inheritance he has no legal claim to." Damien's expression was grim. "Your ex-husband made a mistake. He assumed you'd fight alone. He didn't account for the fact that you have a brother with unlimited resources and a personal stake in watching him burn." Eva wanted to feel relief. Instead, she felt the walls closing in, 2 titans, using her as the battlefield for their own conflict. Damien's motives might be partially genuine, but he still needed her alive and competent to get his $500 million. Everyone wanted something from her, even her own brother. "Why should I trust you?" The question came out raw, vulnerable. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to trust yourself. You've outmaneuvered Garrett at every turn, exposed his fraud, closed a billion-dollar deal under impossible pressure, rebuilt yourself from nothing. Tomorrow, all you have to do is tell the truth. Victor will handle the rest." The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Holloway, we have a problem. Headwind over the Rockies is stronger than forecasted. 90-knot jet stream. We're burning fuel fast. Current ETA is 7:45 a.m. Seattle time." Eva's heart dropped. That gave her 45 minutes to get from Boeing Field to the courthouse downtown. Theoretically possible, but the margin for error was non-existent. "Can you push the engines harder?" "Already at Mach .92, sir. Any faster and we risk structural stress." Damien met Eva's eyes. "It's going to be close. Story of my life." Eva tried to sleep but couldn't. She watched the darkness outside the window give way to the faint gray of pre-dawn, the Rockies passing beneath them like the spine of some massive, slumbering creature. Somewhere down there, Garrett was probably sleeping soundly, confident in his trap, certain Eva wouldn't make it back in time. He was about to learn a critical lesson: never underestimate someone with nothing left to lose. At 6 a.m. Seattle time, Eva's phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert Wall Street Journal posted 2 minutes ago. The headline made her breath catch. Holloway Ventures acquires Meridian Solar Division in record-breaking deal. Sources confirm $1.8 billion acquisition closed late Thursday in Chicago, positioning firm as dominant Midwest renewable energy player. The article quoted industry analysts calling it the most aggressive move Damien had made in 5 years. It mentioned his associate director Evangeline Hale as the lead negotiator. Her name was in the Wall Street Journal. Garrett would see this. He'd know she'd pulled it off. Would know she wasn't the broken housewife he'd discarded. Eva forwarded the article to Scarlett's number even though she'd blocked it. Added a single line: "Choose your side carefully. You're testifying against a woman who just closed the deal of the decade. How do you think that looks?" The message bounced, number no longer in service. Scarlett had already gone dark, probably on Garrett's instructions. No matter, Victor would have the evidence. The truth would out. 30 minutes to landing. The pilot sounded tense. They were in a race against the clock, and physics didn't care about court schedules. "Coffee, black, strongest you have." Eva needed to be sharp-focused, operating at peak capacity. The flight attendant brought espresso that tasted like battery acid and determination. She drank it anyway. Damien was making calls, coordinating. Eva caught fragments: helicopter on standby, courthouse plaza. "I don't care about permits, just have it there." "You're serious about the helicopter?" "You think I'm going to let you lose because of traffic on I-5? We're landing at Boeing Field, which is 15 miles from downtown in morning rush hour. Helicopter gets you there in 8 minutes. That's insane. So is everything else about this situation. Why stop now?" The G65-0 touched down at 7:48 a.m. The wheels had barely stopped rolling before the stairs deployed. Eva grabbed her bag. The white suit Damien had purchased for her was inside, dry cleaned and pressed. She changed in the jet's bathroom, emerging transformed. The suit was stark white, architectural, tailored to perfection. War paint for the battlefield. The helicopter was exactly where Damien promised, a sleek black Bell 429 with rotors already spinning. The noise was deafening wind whipping Eva's hair as she ducked beneath the blades and climbed inside. Damien followed, handing her a file. "Victor's preliminary brief. Read it fast." The helicopter lifted, banking hard over Boeing Field and accelerating northeast. Below I-5 was a parking lot of brake lights, thousands of people trapped in their commutes, unaware that overhead a woman was racing to reclaim her life. Eva read Victor's notes. He'd done his homework, documented every inconsistency in Garrett's claims, subpoenaed Scarlett's bank records showing the $100,000 deposit, even found emails between Garrett and Dylan Kane discussing the Trident fraud. It was comprehensive, devastating, and would obliterate Garrett's credibility. But only if Eva made it to court on time. The pilot's voice crackled. "ETA 3 minutes. Ms. Hale, I can't land on the courthouse grounds. Best I can do is Pioneer Square Plaza, half a block away." "Do it." The helicopter descended over downtown, drawing stares and pointed phones from pedestrians. The skids touched grass at 8:24 a.m. Eva threw open the door, jumped out while the rotors were still spinning. "Go!" Damien's shout barely reached her over the noise. She ran, the white suit bright against the gray morning, her heels clicking on pavement. The courthouse loomed ahead, granite and glass, the architecture of judgment. Security at the entrance tried to slow her down. Eva flashed her ID. "Evangeline Hale, defendant in courtroom 4B, case number." The guard waved her through, eyes wide at the woman who'd literally fallen from the sky. Eva kicked off her heels, grabbed them in one hand, and sprinted down the marble corridor in bare feet. The cold stone shocked against her skin, but she didn't slow. "Courtroom 4B," the placard read. She could hear voices inside Garrett's lawyer mid-sentence, probably asking for default judgment. Eva slammed both hands into the double doors, throwing them open with a bang that echoed like a gunshot. Every head turned. Garrett froze mid-smirk. Preston Whitmore's mouth fell open. Eva stood in the doorway, chest-heaving, white suit immaculate despite the sprint, holding her shoes in one hand and a file folder in the other. She looked like an avenging angel who'd just crashed through the gates of hell. "I object." Her voice rang through the courtroom clear and strong. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, peered over her reading glasses. "Ms. Hale, I presume you're cutting it extremely close." "Apologies, Your Honor. I was in Chicago closing a $1.8 billion merger for Holloway Ventures. Now I'm here to address these baseless accusations." Eva walked down the aisle, slipped her shoes back on without breaking stride, and set her file on the defense table where an elderly man in an immaculate suit waited. Victor Thorne, silver-haired and radiating the quiet confidence of someone who'd won more cases than most lawyers had tried. "Ms. Hale, Mr. Thorne, Mr. Whitmore was just requesting a default judgment based on your absence." The judge's tone suggested she was not impressed with Whitmore's tactics. "Plaintiff's counsel may proceed with his case, but be advised this court does not look kindly on manipulated schedules designed to prevent defendants from appearing." Whitmore recovered his composure. "Your Honor, we're here because Miss Hale engaged in systematic corporate espionage, stealing proprietary information from my client during their marriage and using it to secure employment with a competitor. We have evidence. You have fabrications." Victor's voice was cultured, sharp as a scalpel. "May I present Exhibit A, Your Honor?" He produced a tablet, queued up the security footage of Scarlett meeting with Whitmore. The courtroom screen lit up with the damning video. This footage, taken 48 hours ago, shows Scarlett Vance, the plaintiff's current romantic partner and planned witness, accepting $100,000 in cash from Mr. Whitmore. We have her bank records showing a matching deposit. We also have emails between Mr. Blackwell and his COO Dylan Kane discussing fraud at Trident Maritime, the very fraud Ms. Hale exposed, costing them millions in illegal profits. Garrett lunged to his feet. "That's privileged communication. You can't—" The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Mr. Blackwell, sit down. Mr. Whitmore, did you pay a witness to testify in this case?" Whitmore had gone pale. "Your Honor, I can explain." "I'm certain you can. In fact, you'll explain it to the State Bar Association during their ethics inquiry. This case is dismissed with prejudice." The gavel fell again, final as a headstone. "Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation into witness tampering, perjury, and fraud. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. Blackwell remains available for questioning." The courtroom erupted. Garrett was shouting. Whitmore was gathering papers with shaking hands. Journalists in the gallery were already typing on phones. Eva stood perfectly still, letting it wash over her. She'd won. Not just the case. She'd obliterated Garrett's credibility, exposed his conspiracy, protected the inheritance she hadn't even known existed 12 hours ago. Garrett pushed past the bailiff, got close enough that Eva could see the broken capillaries in his eyes, smell the desperation. "You think you've won. This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll file motion after motion. I'll make your life hell for the next 9 months until that money comes through. Then we'll see who—" "Mr. Blackwell." The judge's voice cut through his tirade. "One more word and I'll hold you in contempt. Leave this courtroom. Now." Security escorted him out, still spitting threats that faded to echoes. Eva watched him go, feeling nothing but a vast, empty relief. Victor began packing his briefcase, movements efficient. "Well done, Ms. Hale. Your brother was right about you. You have a spine of titanium." We're not—" Eva stopped. What were they? Family by blood, but strangers by history. Allies by necessity, but divided by money and motives she didn't fully understand. Outside, the morning sun had burned through the marine layer. Eva walked down the courthouse steps to find Damien waiting by a black sedan, the helicopter long gone. He looked exhausted but satisfied. "Did we win?" "Dismissed with prejudice. Garrett's facing criminal investigation. It's over." "It's not over. It's just beginning." Damien opened the car door for her. You have 9 months until your birthday. Garrett won't give up. He'll find another angle. We need to prepare." Eva slid into the car, suddenly aware of how tired she was. 48 hours without real sleep, 2,000 miles of travel negotiations that had aged her a decade. "Can it wait until tomorrow? I think I've earned 12 hours of unconsciousness." It can wait. But as the car pulled away from the courthouse, Eva's phone buzzed. Email from an unknown sender. Against her instincts, she opened it. A single line. "Congratulations on your victory, but you should know Scarlett went into premature labor this morning. The baby didn't make it. Garrett blames you. Watch your back. A friend." Eva's blood turned to ice. She showed the message to Damien. "This is a threat. Or a warning. Either way, we take it seriously." Damien made a call, voice low and urgent, arranging security details and counter-surveillance measures. Eva stared out the window at Seattle streaming past, wondering when her life had become a chess game, where the pieces were people and the stakes were billions. The game was far from over. It was just entering the end game, and Eva was only beginning to understand the full board. 7 months evaporated like water on hot stone. Eva watched autumn surrender to winter. Then winter crack under spring's assault each day, bringing her closer to the birthday that would transform her from survivor into something else entirely. The inheritance loomed like a second sun on the horizon, impossible to ignore, reshaping everything in its gravity. Garrett had gone quiet after the courthouse debacle, but silence from a wounded predator was more terrifying than noise. He sat in King County Jail awaiting trial on money laundering charges, the Nexus logistics scheme having metastasized into a federal investigation involving Russian oligarchs and shell companies across 3 continents. His bail had been set at $5 million, an amount he couldn't produce because every asset was frozen pending the criminal proceedings. But quieter still was the shadow Eva couldn't shake, a feeling of being watched, investigated by forces she couldn't name. 3 weeks ago, Victor had mentioned unusual inquiries into Jonathan Ashford's estate. Someone with legal standing was asking questions about DNA, about biological heirs, about the exact wording of the will's paternity clauses. Victor's contacts couldn't identify who, only that the inquiries came from a law firm in Boston specializing in estate challenges. Probably Garrett's team fishing. Victor had said it, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Eva had filed it away as paranoia, another symptom of the hypervigilance that came from months of looking over her shoulder. Now, sitting in Victor Thorne's office with May sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, that shadow felt less like paranoia and more like prophecy. The lawyer had aged in the months since the first hearing, more silver in his hair, deeper lines bracketing his mouth. He was reading the conservatorship petition with the focus of a bomb technician examining a device. "They're arguing that your pattern of behavior demonstrates diminished capacity. The suicide attempt 2 years ago, the abrupt career changes, your quote-unquote reckless negotiating tactics in Chicago that, quote, put billions in corporate value at risk." Victor looked up, eyes sharp despite the fatigue. "They've found 3 psychiatrists willing to testify that based on these documented behaviors, you require supervised management of your affairs. At least one of them is credible, Dr. Helena Marsh. She's testified in high-profile competency cases before. What do we have? We have the Chicago deal, which netted Holloway Ventures $112 million in profit last quarter. We have your employment record showing exemplary performance. We have character witnesses willing to attest to your stability. And we have the fact that Garrett is currently in jail facing 20 years for fraud, which somewhat undermines his position as concerned ex-husband." Victor closed the file. "But Eva, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. The suicide attempt, what triggered it?" The memory surfaced like something dead floating to the top of dark water. 2 years ago, the bathroom in the Medina estate, tile cold against her back, pills spilling across the marble counter like candy. Garrett had been in Tokyo with Scarlett. He'd stopped pretending the trips were solo by then. Eva had spent 3 days alone in a house with 12 rooms, each one echoing with the silence of her irrelevance. I took 30 Ambien, washed them down with wine, woke up 16 hours later having vomited most of them into the bathtub. Her voice was clinical, detached. I didn't call for help. I just cleaned up the mess and never told anyone. How do they even know about it? Medical records from a hospital visit 6 months later. You were treated for anxiety, and the ER physician noted historical suicidal ideation in your chart. Garrett must have obtained your records illegally, but the information exists now. Eva stood pacing to the window. Below, ferries crawled across the steel-gray water, carrying people to islands and lives that made sense. I'm not that person anymore. I was drowning then. I'm not drowning now. I believe you. But belief isn't evidence. We need to prove it. Which brings me to Damien's proposal. Something in Victor's tone made Eva turn around. What proposal? He didn't tell you. The lawyer looked genuinely surprised. He submitted an affidavit 3 days ago offering to testify as a character witness. But he also included a personal letter to the court explaining your familial relationship and his financial interest in your competency. He's being transparent about the conflict of interest, which is smart. But he also suggested, and these are his words, that a spousal relationship with stable legal foundation might demonstrate your capacity for sound judgment. Eva's stomach dropped. He wants me to marry him. Not romantically, strategically. A marriage would create legal protections that a conservatorship couldn't easily penetrate. It would also signal to the court that you're capable of forming stable adult relationships, making long-term commitments, planning for the future. It's a business transaction. Most marriages are when you strip away the sentiment. The question is whether you're willing to consider it. Eva returned to her chair, mind racing through implications. Marriage to Damien would solve the immediate problem but create a dozen new ones. What happened after the birthday, after the inheritance activated? Did they divorce? Stay bound together by paperwork and mutual interest in money? Neither of them really needed. I need to talk to him. He's waiting in conference room B, has been for the last hour. Victor's slight smile suggested he'd orchestrated this entire conversation. Eva found Damien in the sleek glass-walled room staring at a laptop screen filled with stock tickers and data streams. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. Victor told you. You should have asked me first. Would you have said yes? The question hung between them, sharp-edged and honest. I don't know. That's not the point. You can't just make decisions about my life without... I'm not making decisions. I'm offering options. Damien closed the laptop. In 2 weeks, you're going to walk into a courtroom where Garrett's lawyers will argue you're incompetent to manage your own affairs. They'll bring psychiatrists and medical records and paint you as unstable. We can fight it, and we will fight it, but there's risk. Judges are unpredictable. One bad ruling and you spend the next 9 months with court-appointed oversight of every financial decision you make. And marriage prevents that. How? Because a spouse has automatic legal authority that supersedes external guardianship claims. If we're married, I can testify not just as your brother but as your husband that you're competent, stable, making sound choices. It creates a legal firewall. Eva walked to the window, looked out at the city she'd learned to navigate alone. What happens after my birthday? After the money comes through? Whatever you want. We can divorce quietly, divide our lives back into separate spheres. Or we stay legally bound for tax purposes and keep living our separate lives. I'm not proposing romance, Eva. I'm proposing survival. She turned to face him, studying the man who shared her blood but remained fundamentally foreign. He was brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely committed to his own interests. But he'd also protected her, given her opportunities, never lied about his motives. There was honor in that transparency. If I say yes, I need rules. We don't live together. We keep separate finances except where legally required to merge them. And when this is over, when the inheritance is secure and Garrett is neutralized, we end it cleanly. Agreed. Damien stood, extending his hand. Partners. Eva looked at his hand, thinking about the architecture of trust. It wasn't binary, not all or nothing, not blind faith or complete skepticism. Trust was a spectrum, and she'd learned to navigate its shades. Trust isn't binary, Damien. It's not all or nothing. I trust you to protect your own interests, which happen to align with mine. I trust that you're ruthless enough to fight Garrett and smart enough to win. That's a better foundation than love ever was." She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and devoid of the crushing dominance Garrett had always needed to assert. It was the handshake of equals. Partners. They were married 4 days later in a King County clerk's office, the ceremony attended by Victor Thorne and a paralegal who served as witnesses. Eva wore a navy suit, Damien wore charcoal gray, and the entire proceeding took 11 minutes. The clerk seemed bored processing their paperwork with the enthusiasm of someone filing tax returns. "By the power vested in me by the state of Washington, I now pronounce you married. You may kiss if you'd like, but it's optional." They didn't kiss. They signed documents, received a marriage certificate that felt heavier than the paper it was printed on, and left in separate cars. That night, Eva stayed in her apartment in Capitol Hill. She'd upgraded to a 2-bedroom after the Chicago deal, and Damien returned to his penthouse downtown. The only thing that changed was a line in a government database and the legal armor it provided. The conservatorship hearing arrived like a storm that had been gathering on the horizon for months. Eva dressed in a slate-gray suit, severe and professional armor against the assault she knew was coming. Victor had prepared her extensively, running mock cross-examinations until her answers were polished smooth. The courtroom was different this time, not the criminal court where she'd defeated Garrett's initial lawsuit, but family court, a space designed for custody battles and divorces and the intimate betrayals that happened behind closed doors. Judge Patricia Kensington presided, a woman in her late 50s known for thorough analysis and imperviousness to emotional appeals. Garrett's new legal team he'd fired Whitmore after the ethics violation was led by Marcus Beaumont, an attorney who specialized in conservatorships for wealthy families. He had the polished appearance of old money and the predatory focus of someone who billed $1,000 an hour. "Your Honor, we're here because Ms. Hale has demonstrated a consistent pattern of impulsive, erratic behavior that suggests she lacks the capacity to manage the significant assets she's about to inherit. We have medical evidence, psychiatric testimony, and documented instances of reckless decision-making." Beaumont presented his case with surgical precision. Dr. Helena Marsh took the stand first, a psychiatrist with credentials that filled 3 pages. She'd never met Eva, but had reviewed her medical records and constructed a profile. Based on the documented suicide attempt, the sudden career abandonment, the high-risk financial maneuvers, and the recent impulsive marriage to her employer, I believe Ms. Hale exhibits signs of borderline personality disorder with possible manic episodes. She requires structured oversight to prevent self-harm or financial catastrophe. Victor cross-examined with the delicacy of a surgeon removing a tumor. "Dr. Marsh, you've never actually spoken to my client, correct?" "That's correct, but medical records provide, and you're aware that the suicide attempt occurred during an abusive marriage, that Ms. Hale sought no treatment because her husband had isolated her from support systems. I can only speak to the documented behavior." "Right. And the high-risk financial maneuvers you referenced, are you aware those maneuvers netted over $100 million in profit?" "Financial success doesn't negate underlying pathology." "Of course not. Tell me, Dr. Marsh, how much is Mr. Beaumont paying you to testify today?" The courtroom went silent. Dr. Marsh's composure cracked. "I'm being compensated for my professional expertise, as is standard, in $50,000. For a profile based on paperwork, never having met the patient, constructing a diagnosis that conveniently supports the party paying you." Victor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I move to strike Dr. Marsh's testimony as biased and unreliable." "Overruled. But Mr. Thorne has made his point. Dr. Marsh, you may step down." The parade continued. Character witnesses who'd known Eva during her marriage testified that she'd seemed withdrawn, fragile, prone to tears. They weren't lying. She had been those things when Garrett was systematically destroying her, but context was everything. Then came the afternoon session. Victor called Eva to the stand. She walked to the witness box, feeling every eye in the courtroom tracking her movement. Her hand on the Bible was steady as she swore to tell the truth. Ms. Ashford, can you explain the circumstances surrounding your suicide attempt 2 years ago? Eva took a breath, centering herself. I was married to a man who told me I was worthless every day in 1,000 small ways. He controlled my access to money, monitored my movements, isolated me from friends and family. I had no job, no purpose, no escape route I could see. So yes, one night I took pills. I wanted the pain to stop. She looked directly at Garrett sitting at the plaintiff's table. But I survived, and in surviving I learned that the bottom of the well is also the place where you find bedrock, where you discover what you're actually made of when everything else is stripped away. That attempt wasn't my weakness. It was the moment I stopped being his victim and started being my own person. Victor nodded. And the marriage to Mr. Holloway, why so sudden? Because Damien is my half-brother. We share a father. And when you find family after years of isolation, when you find someone who believes in your competence rather than betting on your failure, you protect that relationship. The marriage is legal protection, yes, but it's also a statement that I'm capable of making choices that serve my well-being instead of someone else's control. One final question. If the court awards you full control of the Ashford Trust, what will you do with $2.3 billion? Eva had prepared this answer, refined it until every word carried weight. I'll donate $1.2 billion to establish a foundation for domestic violence survivors and women's financial literacy programs. I'll invest another $500 million in sustainable infrastructure projects that create jobs and address climate change. I'll keep $600 million for myself, enough to live comfortably, and continue the work I'm doing at Holloway Ventures. The money isn't the point. The point is using resources to prevent other women from ending up where I was. The courtroom was silent. Even Judge Kensington looked moved, though her expression remained carefully neutral. Beaumont stood for cross-examination, smoothing his tie. Ms. Ashford, you paint a compelling picture of redemption. But isn't it true that your brother stands to gain $500 million if you successfully inherit, that his motives in marrying you might be purely financial? Yes, it's true. He's been transparent about that from the beginning. I prefer honest self-interest to false altruism. At least with Damien, I know exactly what I'm getting. And the Chicago deal you're so proud of, wasn't that a reckless gamble that could have cost Holloway Ventures billions? It was a calculated risk based on extensive research. Risk and recklessness aren't synonyms, Mr. Beaumont. The difference is competence. She watched him bristle, knew she'd scored a hit. You seem quite confident for someone who attempted suicide. I'm confident because I survived it. There's nothing you can threaten me with that's worse than the things I've already endured and overcome. That's not instability. That's resilience. Beaumont had no response to that. He sat down, and Eva stepped off the witness stand, feeling like she'd just completed a marathon through hostile territory. Damien testified next, his appearance causing a stir. Billionaires didn't usually show up to family court proceedings. He wore a suit that cost more than most people's cars, and carried himself with the casual authority of someone who owned buildings. Mr. Holloway, you married your employee. Some might call that a conflict of interest. Beaumont's tone dripped skepticism. Some might. I call it recognizing that the most competent person I've ever worked with also happens to be family. Eva earned her position through merit, not nepotism. I didn't even know she was my sister when I hired her. Convenient. True, which is what matters in this court. Damien's eyes were cold-focused. I've built a $12 billion company by identifying talent and eliminating incompetence. Eva Ashford is the former. If she weren't, I'd have fired her regardless of DNA. The fact that she's family is secondary to the fact that she's exceptional at what she does. The hearing lasted into the second day. Arguments circled the central question: was Eva Ashford capable of managing her own life, or did she need a court-appointed guardian to protect her from herself? On the afternoon of the second day, Judge Kensington retired to chambers to deliberate. Eva sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, Damien beside her in silence, Victor pacing with nervous energy unusual for a man of his experience. 40 minutes later, the bailiff emerged. "Judge is ready." They filed back into the courtroom. Judge Kensington sat behind the bench, reading glasses perched on her nose, the written decision in front of her. She looked up, scanning the assembled parties. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides. This is a complex case involving significant financial interests, family dynamics, and questions of mental health that don't have simple answers. Eva's heart hammered against her ribs. However, the burden of proof in conservatorship cases rests with the petitioner. Mr. Beaumont needed to demonstrate by clear and convincing evidence that Ms. Ashford lacks capacity to manage her affairs. He has not met that burden. Relief flooded through Eva like warm water. The evidence shows a woman who experienced trauma and emerged from it stronger, who made calculated professional decisions that yielded exceptional results, who has demonstrated insight into her own mental health and taken steps to protect herself legally and emotionally. The suicide attempt, while concerning, occurred in the context of an abusive relationship and does not indicate current incompetence. Judge Kensington removed her glasses. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Ms. Ashford retains full control of her person and estate. The gavel fell. Eva stood on legs that felt like water. The relief lasted exactly 3 seconds before Victor's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen face, going carefully blank. What? Email from the estate executor. There's been a complication. Someone filed a last-minute challenge to your paternity. They're requesting emergency DNA verification before the trust can activate. Damien's hand gripped her elbow. Who? A Dr. Richard Ashford. Claims to be Jonathan's brother. Claims he has standing to challenge the will if you're not a biological heir. The victory turned to ash in Eva's mouth. Jonathan never mentioned a brother. Because Richard Ashford was declared legally dead in 1997, Victor said, already scrolling through information. Apparently he's risen from the grave, and he's coming for your inheritance. There's a hearing scheduled for your birthday, 9 a.m. Eva's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello? Eva, it's Scarlett. The voice was hollow, emptied of everything that made it human. I heard you won the conservatorship. Congratulations. But it's not over. Garrett's planning something with this Richard person. I don't know details, but I heard him talking to Beaumont about DNA, about proving you're not Jonathan's daughter. He thinks he can still stop you. How would he? I don't know, but he's desperate. Desperate people burn everything down rather than lose. I learned that when I lost my daughter. Scarlett's breathing was ragged. I'm sorry I helped him. I'm sorry for all of it. Be careful. The line went dead. Eva stood holding her phone, processing the warning. 2 weeks until her birthday. 2 weeks until Richard Ashford tried to steal everything. The days contracted to hours, then to minutes. Eva's 35th birthday arrived on a Tuesday in June, the kind of crystalline Pacific Northwest morning that made poets weep. She woke in her apartment alone and lay in bed watching sunlight paint geometric patterns across the ceiling. At 9 a.m., according to the terms of Jonathan Ashford's trust, control of $2.3 billion would transfer to her name unless Richard Ashford succeeded in proving she had no claim to it. She dressed in white. Not the suit from the first hearing, but something new, ivory silk with architectural lines severe and pristine. Armor for the final battle. The courthouse was the same building where she'd won her freedom from Garrett, where she'd defeated conservatorship, where she'd built her new life, one victory at a time. Now it would decide whether that life had been built on truth or lies. Judge Kensington looked significantly less pleased to see the parties assembled again. Mr. Beaumont, this had better be extraordinary. You're asking me to void a multi-billion-dollar inheritance on the day it's set to transfer. Your Honor, we have DNA evidence that fundamentally undermines the legitimacy of Ms. Ashford's claim. Beaumont presented Charts Lab reports testimony from a geneticist who explained in excruciating detail why the samples showed no biological relationship between Eva and Jonathan Ashford. Victor cross-examined viciously. Dr. Sterling, how did you obtain the sample allegedly from Ms. Ashford? It was provided by counsel through proper channels. What channels which you accessed how? The geneticist hesitated. I was provided materials by Mr. Beaumont's firm. The documentation seemed isn't a standard recognized by this court. Victor turned to the judge. Your Honor, this is a manufactured crisis based on samples with no verifiable provenance. Mr. Beaumont is asking you to disinherit a woman based on evidence that wouldn't pass muster in traffic court. I have verifiable provenance. The new voice came from the gallery. Eva turned to see a man standing late 60s, silver hair, wearing an expensive suit and carrying an air of absolute authority. She didn't recognize him. And who are you? Judge Kensington's patience was evaporating. Dr. Richard Ashford, Jonathan's younger brother, Eva's uncle. And I can verify that the DNA results are accurate because I ordered them myself 3 months ago. The courtroom erupted. Eva felt like she'd been punched in the chest. An uncle she'd never met, never even knew existed, had been investigating her. Order Kensington's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Dr. Ashford approached the bench. The man walked forward with calm assurance. He looked at Eva as he passed something calculating in his expression. Your Honor, I've spent the last year investigating my brother's estate because I believed something was wrong. Jonathan and I were estranged for decades, but we shared enough DNA for me to verify familial relationships. I obtained samples from Jonathan's research donation and from Eva through medical records I had legal access to. Eva's mind reeled. The results are conclusive. Eva shares no paternal DNA with Jonathan Ashford, which means my brother's will was based on false pretenses. As his only living biological relative, I have standing to claim the estate under Washington intestacy laws if the will is voided. That's a lie. Damien's voice cut through the chaos. Is it? Then you won't mind submitting to DNA testing right now, Mr. Holloway? Let's see if you're Jonathan's biological son. The courtroom held its breath. Eva watched Damien's face, searching for denial. I already know I'm not. The admission was quiet, devastating. I found out 4 years ago. My mother lied to Jonathan, but that doesn't change Eva's status. She is his daughter. Richard smiled, pulling out another document. Actually, the contaminated sample your lawyer is about to reference came from a lab I also paid. I wanted to see how far you'd go to protect a fraud. But I have clean samples from 3 independent labs. All say the same thing: she's not an Ashford. Judge Kensington looked at Eva. Ms. Ashford, do you have evidence to refute this? Eva opened her mouth. No words came. Because she had nothing. No counter-tests. No proof. Just the certainty that Jonathan was her father, because her mother had said so, and her mother wouldn't lie about something like that. Would she? The courtroom door slammed open. A woman in her 60s strode down the aisle, sharp-eyed, radiating competence, carrying a file folder like a weapon. Your Honor, I'm Margaret Chen, representing Ms. Ashford. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I have evidence that changes everything. She approached the bench, Victor looking as shocked as everyone else. Who hired you? Margaret glanced at the gallery. Eva followed her gaze to see Scarlett sitting in the back row, looking thin and haunted, but present. A concerned party who wanted justice. Your Honor, Dr. Richard Ashford was declared legally dead in 1997 after a sailing accident off the coast of Oregon. He's been living under an assumed identity, Richard Brennan, for 27 years. He has no legal standing to claim anything because legally he doesn't exist. Richard's face went from confident to ashen. I have documentation from the Portland Police Department death certificate and records showing that Richard Brennan filed for a legal name change in 2019 back to Richard Ashford specifically to position himself for this inheritance challenge. Margaret slid documents across to the judge. Furthermore, these are the actual DNA results from Eva Ashford and Jonathan Ashford's preserved samples processed by 3 independent labs I hired. They show a 99.7% probability of paternity. The samples Dr. Ashford presented were deliberately contaminated with genetic material from an unknown third party. She produced a USB drive. This contains security footage of a lab technician doctor. Ashford paid $250,000 to falsify results. The technician has provided testimony to the FBI in exchange for immunity. Richard lunged toward the exit. The bailiff blocked his path. Judge Kensington's expression was thunderous. "You faked your own death, Mr. Ashford. You've been living under false identity for decades. You fabricated evidence to defraud your niece of billions of dollars." She looked at the bailiff. "Detain him. I want prosecutors looking into fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges immediately." The judge turned to Eva. "Ms. Ashford, I apologize for this circus. The DNA evidence presented by Dr. Richard Ashford is hereby stricken as fraudulent. Ms. Chen's independent testing confirms you are Jonathan Ashford's biological daughter. The will stands. The trust activates." Kensington checked her watch. "It's 9:47 a.m. You are 35 years and 47 minutes old. Congratulations on your inheritance. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Eva stood in the emptying courtroom, legs unsteady. Damien approached slowly. "I should have told you about not being his biological son. I'm sorry. You chose truth over $500 million. That counts for something." Eva looked at Margaret Chen, who was packing her briefcase. "Who paid you?" "Scarlett Vance, with what remained of Garrett's bribe money. She said you deserved better than what he gave you, than what any of them gave you." Scarlett was gone from the gallery, disappeared like smoke. Eva pulled out her phone, sent a text to the number that had warned her. "Thank you for everything. Stay in touch." The response came immediately. "I will, and congratulations. Use it well." 2 hours later, Eva sat in a conference room with Damien, Victor, Margaret, and the executor, Judith Rollins, who'd been managing the trust for 17 years. The trust was set to activate automatically at 9 a.m., but I froze the transfer when Richard's emergency motion was filed at 8:47. Now that the challenge is resolved and the court has confirmed your status, the trust activates the moment you sign. Judith slid papers across the table. "It's 12:47 p.m. You're 35 years and 3 hours old. Are you ready?" Eva looked at Damien. He looked exhausted, emotionally stripped, but he managed a small smile. "Your choice. Always your choice." She signed. The pen felt impossibly heavy, the weight of billions compressing into ink on paper. When she set it down, Judith smiled. "Congratulations. You're now worth $2.47 billion. The trust grew during the waiting period." Eva felt nothing, then everything, then a strange oceanic calm. "I need a moment." She walked to the courthouse bathroom, the same one where she'd hidden after the first hearing 10 months and a lifetime ago. She locked herself in a stall and finally let herself feel it. Not joy, not triumph, just a vast relief that felt like coming up for air after being underwater for years. She was free, truly free. Not because of the money, though, that helped. Free because she'd fought every battle they'd thrown at her and emerged not just intact, but forged into something stronger than she'd ever been. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to a photo she'd kept hidden in a locked folder, her mother taken a year before she died. Smiling proud, holding a young Eva's face between her hands. "I did it, Mom. I survived. And I'm going to make sure other daughters don't have to fight as hard as I did." Then she dried her eyes, fixed her reflection in the mirror, a woman in white, who'd walked through fire and come out gleaming, and went to close the final chapter. She dialed King County Jail from the courthouse steps. "I need to speak with Garrett Blackwell. Tell him Eva Ashford is calling." The wait was interminable. Then his voice wary and bitter. "Come to gloat. I came to tell you something. I got the money, all of it, $2.4 billion. And the first thing I'm doing with it is endowing a foundation in my mother's name. It'll provide legal services and financial support for women escaping abusive marriages. We'll help thousands of women do what I had to do alone." Silence. "You could have had a partner, Garrett. You could have had someone who loved you. Instead, you chose to have property. I hope the view from your cell gives you time to understand the difference." She hung up before he could respond. Damien was waiting by a black sedan, the courthouse steps emptying behind them as afternoon settled over Seattle. What happens now? His question was genuine, uncertain. Now we figure out how to be family. Real family, not the legal fiction we created to survive. If you want to. Damien extended his hand, then seemed to reconsider. He pulled her into an awkward hug, instead physical affection, clearly foreign territory but genuine. "I'd like that, sister." When they pulled apart, Eva smiled. "I'm starving. Buy me lunch." "You're the billionaire. You buy me lunch." Fair point. They walked down the courthouse steps together into June sunshine that felt like benediction. Behind them, the building held the wreckage of conspiracies and betrayals. Ahead, the future spread out like an ocean, vast, uncertain, and finally entirely their own to navigate. Eva had started with nothing. She'd ended with everything. And somewhere in between, she'd learned the truth that no inheritance could teach. The real wealth wasn't in bank accounts or stock portfolios. It was in the strength to decide who you became when the world tried to decide for you. It was in surviving the bottom of the well and using that bedrock to build something unshakable. It was in choosing truth over comfort, resilience over bitterness, and using power to lift others instead of crushing them. The money was just a tool. Eva Ashford was the weapon, and she was just getting started.